For years, a wealthy and emotionally distant billionaire watched his autistic son sit quietly by the same window, pointing toward the courtyard and repeating the same strange words no one could understand. Doctors called it just another symptom. Nannies ignored it. He assumed it was meaningless. But then a new maid arrived, someone different. She noticed what everyone else had missed. She paid attention. What she discovered outside that window would uncover a heartbreaking truth, a missing piece of the past, and a secret that would change their family forever. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Ethan was a small boy who spent most of his time in silence, sitting by a large window in his estate. Every day he would stare outside, pointing his finger towards the courtyard and repeating the same phrase over and over again. "Mommy again there." He didn't speak much otherwise, and when he did, nobody could really understand him. Ethan was autistic, and people often assumed his words didn't mean anything important. He had no friends. He didn't go out to play or talk to other kids. He just stayed close to the window, saying his strange phrase and pointing as if something very important was out there. His father, Alexander, didn't pay attention to it. Alexander thought Ethan's behavior was just part of his condition. He didn't ask questions, and he never tried to understand. To Alexander, his son was just a quiet boy with special needs who lived in his own world. Alexander was a rich man. He was the owner of a big company and had more than enough money to give his son anything he needed. But Alexander was not warm or loving. He had lost his wife when Ethan was born, and since then he had never been the same. He never got over her death, and that pain made him distant. He didn't try to connect with Ethan or listen to him. Even when Ethan repeated the same phrase every day, Alexander just walked past him without stopping. He didn't ask what Ethan meant or why he was pointing outside. Alexander had built a life around avoiding emotions. To him, feelings were a problem he didn't have time for. He kept himself busy with business meetings, calls, and emails, always finding reasons to ignore what was happening at home. He told himself Ethan was safe, fed, and taken care of. That was enough. The people who worked in the estate followed the same pattern. There were maids, cooks, and drivers, but none of them really looked at Ethan. They did their jobs, cleaned, cooked, drove, answered calls, but they didn't ask questions. They were used to seeing the boy at the window and hearing his strange words. It became part of the routine, like background noise. Nobody stopped to wonder why he always pointed to the same place, or why he seemed so focused. Some thought it was just how autistic kids behaved. Others were afraid to ask questions that might bring trouble. And so day after day, Ethan sat alone, trying to show something with his small hands and quiet voice. But no one took the time to truly see him. Even though Ethan didn't speak clearly, he was trying very hard to say something. His words were not random. He kept saying the same thing for a reason. "Mommy again there." Every time he said it, he pointed outside toward the same spot in the courtyard. His eyes looked serious and full of meaning, but he didn't know how to explain better. He was still just a child, and autism made it harder for him to express what he felt. Still, inside his mind, he knew what he was trying to say. Something out there reminded him of his mother. Maybe it was a shape, a movement, or a person. Maybe he had seen something strange, but nobody was asking. He repeated his message day after day, hoping someone would finally hear him and help him explain. Then, one day, someone new came into the estate. A new maid was hired to help with cleaning and organizing. She wasn't like the others. She didn't rush through her work, and she wasn't afraid to stop and look around. On her first day, she noticed Ethan at the window. She saw how he pointed to the courtyard and heard the words he kept repeating. At first, she didn't understand either, but something made her stop and watch. She saw the sadness in his face and the way he tried to communicate. Even if no one had ever listened before, she didn't just walk past him like the rest. She paused. She looked where he was pointing, and in that small moment, everything began to change. The new maid started to pay closer attention to Ethan. She began asking gentle questions and sitting beside him quietly, not trying to force him to speak, just being present. She noticed the details others had ignored, how his fingers always pointed to the same tree, how his voice changed slightly when he spoke, how his body moved with a sense of urgency. For the first time in a long while, someone was watching him not as a problem, but as a child. She didn't treat him like he was broken or invisible. She treated him like someone who had something to say. And the more time she spent near him, the more she began to understand. Ethan was not just repeating a memory. He was trying to show them something that was happening now, something real, something that no one else had seen. And so the story begins with a small boy in a big window, a boy who pointed every day and spoke words that seemed strange to everyone except him. A boy who had lived in silence, surrounded by people who never really looked at him. But now someone had noticed. Someone had listened. And for the first time, there was a small hope that Ethan's words would be heard, and his message would finally be understood. The mystery of the courtyard, the meaning behind Mommy again there, and the truth behind what Ethan saw. All of it was still waiting to be discovered. But something important had already happened. The invisible child was not invisible anymore. Sophia was a young woman from a poor background. She lived in a small house far from the city and worked hard to support her mother and younger siblings. When she got the job at Alexander's estate as a maid, she was thankful and nervous. It was the biggest house she had ever entered. On her first day, she arrived early wearing clean but simple clothes and was shown around by the head maid. She quickly noticed that the place was quiet, almost too quiet. The employees did their work in silence, and nobody spoke unless necessary. While walking through the hallway, Sophia saw a small boy sitting by the window. He wasn't moving much, just staring outside. Then he pointed toward the courtyard and softly said, "Mommy, again, there." The other staff ignored it. But Sophia stopped walking. She felt something strange in that moment. A feeling that this boy was not just quiet. He was deeply sad. Over the next few days, Sophia kept seeing the boy in the same spot doing the same thing. She asked one of the older maids who he was. "That's Ethan," the maid said. "He's the boss's son. Don't mind him. He's special." Sophia didn't like how cold that answer was. She kept watching Ethan from a distance. He didn't speak much, but she could feel he was trying to say something. Most people walked past him without a glance. Sophia didn't. She started greeting him every morning with a smile and a quiet, "Hello." At first, Ethan didn't react. But Sophia was patient. She never forced him to speak. She just made sure he saw that someone was noticing him. Slowly, Ethan's eyes began to follow her. When she cleaned the hallway, he watched. When she brought laundry down the stairs, he peeked around the corner. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As days turned into weeks, Ethan began to follow Sophia around the estate. He didn't say anything at first, just walked behind her quietly like a shadow. Sophia didn't mind. She let him be close, talking softly to him about whatever she was doing, folding towels, making the bed, preparing lunch. One day, while she was wiping the table, she looked over and saw something that surprised her. Ethan was smiling. It was a small, quiet smile, but it was real. Sophia smiled back. That evening, when she brought him a piece of fruit, he took it and said something that made her freeze. "Mommy." At first, Sophia thought she heard it wrong, but then he repeated it. "Mommy?" She didn't know what to say. Her heart felt heavy, but also full. She crouched down beside him, gently touching his hand. "I'm Sophia," she said softly. Ethan just looked at her and smiled again. Sophia didn't know why Ethan called her Mommy, but she didn't feel upset about it. Instead, she felt touched. She could see that Ethan didn't say that word lightly. Maybe he remembered his real mother and saw something similar in her. Or maybe he just felt safe. Either way, Sophia didn't correct him. She let him call her that. Whenever he said Mommy, she simply smiled and answered him with kindness. Alexander, however, didn't think much of it. When Sophia mentioned it to him one day, he just shrugged and said, "He gets confused. It's just how he is." Sophia disagreed, but she didn't argue. She started to feel that there was something deeper going on, Ethan was trying to connect, and Sophia was the only one who seemed willing to listen. He wasn't just repeating things without reason. There was meaning behind his actions. Sophia knew she had to pay attention. Every time Ethan pointed to the courtyard and said, "Mommy, again there," Sophia became more curious. At first she thought it was just a memory, something the boy couldn't let go of. But the way he repeated it daily, always at the same time, with the same finger pointing to the same exact spot, it started to feel more like a clue. Sophia began watching him closely. She noticed that his body would tense up before he said the words, and his eyes would fix on something outside. But every time she looked, there was nothing there. Just a normal part of the courtyard, a tree, some grass, and flowers. Still, the habit didn't stop. Ethan kept doing it, and Sophia couldn't ignore it any longer. She felt that he was trying to show something important, something that had gone unnoticed for too long. She made a quiet decision. She needed to find out what was out there. One afternoon, when the estate was quiet and the other workers were busy, Sophia stood beside Ethan at the window. He was already there, like always, pointing and whispering, "Mommy, again, there." Sophia knelt down beside him and looked in the direction he was pointing. She took a deep breath. "Let's go see, Ethan," she said gently. She held out her hand. Ethan hesitated, but then slowly took it. They walked together through the hallway, past the kitchen, and out the back door into the courtyard. Sophia followed his lead, watching where his eyes landed. They walked past the flowers, past the tree, until they reached a corner of the courtyard that seemed untouched. Sophia looked around. There was something hidden behind a bush, something small and strange. She turned back to Ethan. His face was serious now. This was the place. Sophia finally understood. Whatever Ethan had been pointing to, it was real. It was late in the afternoon. The sun was still out, but the light was softer now. Sophia stood next to Ethan at the big window, just like she had done many times before. He was pointing again quietly with the same words on his lips. "Mommy, again, there." This time Sophia didn't just look outside. She gently bent down, held Ethan's hand and said, "Let's go see what's out there, okay?" Ethan looked at her. He didn't speak, but he nodded slowly. Sophia opened the back door and led him into the courtyard. They walked carefully, step by step, along the path. The grass was thick and a little overgrown. No one seemed to use this part of the courtyard anymore. Ethan held her hand tightly, not looking around but staring ahead. It was as if he knew exactly where they were going. Sophia followed his lead, saying nothing, just staying close. They reached a corner of the courtyard, hidden behind some tall plants and old trees. The branches were dry and some leaves scratched their legs as they passed. It looked like nobody had cleaned or touched that part of the yard for years. Sophia moved some thick bushes aside, and that's when they saw it. An old swing hanging from a crooked wooden frame. The swing was covered in rust, and one of the ropes was slightly frayed, but it was still standing. Ethan didn't wait. He walked straight to it, sat down, and started to swing slowly. His legs moved back and forth and his eyes closed. Then he whispered something softly. "Mommy, again!" Sophia stood there, frozen. She felt a strange chill go through her body. This place, this swing, it wasn't just an old toy. It was important to Ethan. This was what he had been pointing to all along. As Sophia watched, she realized what this place meant. It wasn't just a courtyard corner. It was a memory. A piece of Ethan's past was still alive here. He wasn't pointing to the swing because it was fun. He was pointing because it reminded him of something or someone. Sophia slowly sat down on the ground near the swing, not speaking, just letting Ethan feel what he needed to feel. He kept swinging, his eyes closed, still whispering the same words now and then. Sophia began to understand that Ethan wasn't repeating empty phrases. He was trying to return to a time when he felt loved and safe. That swing was his way back to his mother. Maybe he used to sit there with her. Maybe she used to push the swing for him. Whatever it was, it mattered to him deeply. And finally, someone was here to see it and stay with him. That day changed something in Sophia. After that, she made a promise to herself. She would bring Ethan to the swing every day, not because he asked, but because she understood. This wasn't just a game or a walk. It was healing. It was memory. So the next afternoon, she took his hand again, and they walked to the swing just like before. Ethan didn't speak much, but she could see the difference in his body. He was calmer. His shoulders weren't so tight. He smiled more now, even if it was just a little. He still said "Mommy," but Sophia no longer corrected him. She didn't need to. She knew that he wasn't confused. He was remembering, and that memory helped him feel close to someone he had lost. Every time he sat on the swing, it was like going back to a place where things made sense to him. Other workers in the estate still didn't understand. Some of them whispered things like, "Why does she waste time in that old courtyard?" Or, "That boy is always going to be like that." But Sophia didn't care. She didn't explain herself. She didn't try to change their minds. Her focus was Ethan. The more time she spent with him, the more he opened up in his own way. He started humming small tunes. He started holding her hand without fear. Once he even pointed to a flower and said, "Pretty," which made Sophia smile the whole day. The courtyard became their quiet place, a space where no one else came and no one else judged. Just Sophia and Ethan. She brought a small blanket one day and sat with him for an hour while he swung back and forth. It wasn't loud or exciting, but it felt real. It felt peaceful. It felt important. Day after day, they kept going back. No matter if it was sunny or cloudy, Sophia and Ethan made that small trip to the back of the courtyard. The swing stayed the same, old, a little broken, but still holding strong. Ethan would sit on it, swing slowly, and close his eyes. He never asked for anything else. That place, that moment, gave him something no one else could. Connection. Sophia never missed a day. She started keeping the area clean, trimming a few plants, removing dry leaves, not to change it, but to protect it. She respected what it meant to Ethan. She knew now that the boy at the window had never been lost in nonsense. He had always been trying to show them this. A place filled with silence, but full of meaning. A place where he once felt loved. A place where he could still whisper, "Mommy," again, and feel close to her. It was another quiet afternoon when Sophia took Ethan out to the courtyard. Like always, they walked hand in hand to the old swing at the far end of the yard. Ethan was calm and he seemed happy. He didn't speak much, but Sophia had learned to read his expressions. As they reached the swing, Ethan let go of her hand and walked to his usual spot. Sophia laid a small blanket on the ground and sat down. Everything felt normal until something caught her attention. On top of a large rock a few meters away stood a little girl. She was very thin, and her clothes were dirty and torn. Her hair was messy and her face had smudges of dirt. But her eyes were sharp, focused, watching them without fear. She didn't say a word. Sophia stood up quickly, unsure of what to do. The girl didn't move. She just kept watching silently. Sophia stayed still for a moment, trying to decide whether to call out or step back. Ethan, however, surprised her. Instead of being nervous or shy, he turned and looked at the girl. A smile slowly appeared on his face. Without saying anything, he walked toward her. Sophia's heart started beating faster. Ethan never reacted this way to strangers. He usually hid behind her or looked away, but now he seemed completely comfortable, even happy. The girl climbed down from the rock and walked toward Ethan. The two children stood face to face, and then, like they had known each other forever, they both walked to the swing and began playing. First Ethan sat while the girl pushed him. Then they switched places. They didn't speak, but their body language was full of energy and joy. Sophia couldn't believe what she was seeing. The connection between them was immediate, deep, and completely natural. As Sophia watched them play, something began to bother her. It wasn't just their quick bond that seemed unusual. It was the way they looked. The girl had the same hair color as Ethan. Her eyes were the same shape and shade of brown. Even her facial expressions and small gestures, like how she tilted her head or moved her hands, felt strangely familiar. Sophia leaned closer, studying them both carefully. They even seemed to be around the same age, maybe 5 or 6 years old. When the girl laughed, Ethan laughed too. When she ran in circles, he copied her. Sophia felt goosebumps. It was almost like looking at twins, but that couldn't be. Ethan didn't have any siblings, or at least that's what everyone believed. Sophia had never heard of any other children in Alexander's family. Still, she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. There was something deeper going on, something she didn't yet understand. Sophia stood and slowly walked toward the children. She didn't want to scare the girl away, so she spoke softly. "Hi there, are you hungry? Would you like something to eat?" The girl looked at her for a second, then nodded. Sophia opened the small bag she had brought and took out a sandwich and a bottle of water. She handed it to the girl, who grabbed the food quickly and ate with big bites, like someone who hadn't eaten in a long time. Sophia knelt beside her and tried to talk again. "What's your name? Where do you live?" The girl paused for a moment, but said nothing. She kept chewing, eyes down. Then, just as quietly as she had arrived, the girl stood up. She gave Ethan one last look and smiled. Before Sophia could ask anything else, the girl turned and ran into the trees. Within seconds she was gone. Sophia ran after her for a few steps, calling out, but the girl had vanished. The trees were thick in that part of the courtyard, and Sophia couldn't see where she had gone. She returned to Ethan, who was now sitting on the swing again, looking peaceful. Sophia sat beside him, her mind full of questions. Who was that girl? Where did she come from? Why did Ethan react so warmly to her when he usually avoided new people? And more than anything, why did they look so alike? Sophia couldn't shake the strange feeling in her chest. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a random visit from a poor child wandering through the trees. Something about the way the girl appeared, the way she connected with Ethan without speaking, and the way she disappeared. It all felt too perfect, too strange. Sophia knew this was not an ordinary moment. It meant something. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the girl. There was no way she imagined it. Ethan saw her too, played with her, laughed with her. Sophia decided she needed to be ready in case the girl came back. She began keeping extra food and clothes in her bag just in case. She even brought a flashlight and checked the courtyard path more carefully each day. But deep down, Sophia felt that the girl hadn't appeared by accident. There was something else going on, something that had to do with Ethan. Maybe the girl held answers about his past. Maybe she was part of a story no one had told. All Sophia knew was that she had to find out more. The courtyard was no longer just a quiet place with an old swing. It was now the center of something mysterious, and it had all started with a little girl standing on a rock. Back inside the estate, Sophia couldn't hold in what she had seen. She sat down in the kitchen, still thinking about the little girl who had appeared in the courtyard. After a few minutes, she stood up and went straight to Alexander's office. He was working as always behind his large desk, staring at a screen full of numbers and documents. Sophia knocked lightly. "I need to talk to you," she said. Alexander didn't look up. "About what?" he replied, still typing. "About Ethan and something that happened today." Alexander sighed, but finally gave her his attention. Sophia explained everything. How the girl appeared in the courtyard, how dirty and thin she looked, how she didn't speak, and how she disappeared. Alexander showed no reaction until she described the girl's face. "She looks exactly like Ethan," Sophia said. "Same eyes, same hair, even the way she moves." That's when Alexander stopped completely still. For a moment, Alexander didn't speak. He looked past Sophia like he wasn't really in the room anymore. Something in her words had hit him hard. He stood up and walked slowly to the window. "That's impossible," he muttered. Sophia waited quietly. Alexander didn't usually show emotion, but now his face looked pale and strange. "There was a problem when Ethan was born," he said slowly. "My wife died during the delivery. They told me there were complications. I didn't even get to hold her hand." He paused, remembering something he hadn't thought about in years. The doctors said there was confusion. For a few minutes, no one was sure what was happening. Then they told me she was gone, and that only one baby had survived. Alexander turned around and looked at Sophia. But I remember thinking just for a second that something didn't feel right. I always had a doubt. Sophia had never heard Alexander speak like that. He was usually cold, focused only on work and routine. But now something deep had opened up inside him. "You never checked?" Sophia asked. "Never asked for proof." Alexander shook his head. "I trusted the hospital, and I was too broken. I had just lost the woman I loved. I had a newborn baby to care for. I didn't question anything. But now," he stopped again, thinking. Sophia could tell he was trying to stay calm, but his hands were shaking. "Now you're telling me there's a girl who looks just like Ethan, who shows up out of nowhere, doesn't speak, and disappears again?" Alexander ran his hand through his hair. "I don't know what's going on, but I need answers. I can't ignore this." He walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old folder. The folder was dusty and worn, filled with old papers, hospital records, birth reports, and death certificates. Alexander hadn't opened it in years. He sat down and started flipping through the pages, while Sophia stood nearby, watching. His eyes scanned the words quickly. The documents confirmed what he already knew. 1 live birth, female deceased. But something about the way the documents were written felt off now. There were smudges, corrections, even 2 different doctor signatures on one form. Alexander frowned. Why are there 2 doctors here? Why were there delays in reporting? He looked up at Sophia. "I need to go back to that hospital." Sophia nodded. "Do you want me to come?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'll go alone." Alexander closed the folder and put it in a bag. "If someone lied to me, if something happened to my child, I need to know the truth." That night, he booked a flight. While Alexander started digging into the past, Sophia stayed with Ethan like always. She continued their daily visits to the swing in the courtyard. Each day the girl returned, never speaking, never staying long, but she always came. She played with Ethan like they had known each other forever. She smiled when he smiled. Sometimes she would touch his hand or sit beside him without saying a word. Sophia began to notice patterns. The girl only came during the late afternoons. She never accepted more food and she never answered questions, but her presence was consistent. Sophia kept a notebook and started writing everything down. The time she appeared, how long she stayed, what she did. Sophia felt like she was part of something much bigger now. This wasn't just about helping Ethan anymore. It was about understanding who this girl was and why Ethan was so deeply connected to her without even speaking. Alexander called from the airport before boarding his flight. "I'll let you know what I find," he told Sophia. "Watch Ethan, keep track of everything." Sophia agreed. After he hung up, she looked at the swing through the window. Ethan was there again, and the girl had just arrived. They were sitting close together, their heads nearly touching. Sophia felt something heavy in her chest. This was more than coincidence. She was sure of it now. Ethan had never connected with anyone the way he did with this mysterious girl. And she, whoever she was, had come with a purpose. Sophia couldn't explain how she knew. She just did. And if Alexander's suspicion was right, then something terrible had happened years ago. Maybe someone had taken the baby girl. Maybe they were twins, separated at birth. Sophia looked at them through the glass, still writing notes in her notebook. She knew the truth was coming. Sophia had been watching the bond between Ethan and the little girl grow stronger every day. It was something special, something she had never seen before. The 2 of them didn't need to speak to understand each other. They communicated with looks, hand gestures, and simple movements. When one of them stood up, the other followed. When one laughed, the other laughed too. They often sat quietly next to each other on the swing, or played simple games like touching leaves or tossing small rocks into a pile. Sophia was amazed at how connected they were. She had worked with other children before, and none of them had shown this kind of silent understanding. What surprised her the most was how peaceful Ethan had become. He used to avoid people, but now around the girl he was open and relaxed. It felt like the 2 of them were part of the same story. One afternoon, Sophia saw something that made her eyes water. Ethan was playing with the girl near the edge of the courtyard when he suddenly looked at her and said, "Sister." It was a soft word, but clear. The girl stopped, looked at him and smiled. Then she laughed. The kind of laugh that made it clear she understood exactly what he meant. She didn't correct him. She accepted it. Sophia stood still for a moment. Sister meant sister. Ethan had never called anyone that before. It wasn't something he repeated from others. It was something he chose on his own. From that moment on, he kept calling her that. "Sister, come. Sister, swing." The girl always responded with a smile or by holding his hand. Sophia's heart tightened every time she heard it. She started to wonder if it wasn't just a sweet nickname, but something more real, something deeper than anyone had expected. Sophia wanted to help the girl more. She tried to bring her inside the estate a few times, offering food, a bath, even a place to sleep. But each time the girl stopped at the door and shook her head. She wouldn't cross the threshold. Sophia asked gently, "Are you scared?" The girl didn't answer, but her body language made it clear she didn't trust adults. She only stayed close to Ethan and Sophia. She slept outside near the trees or behind the courtyard wall. Sophia often left food and blankets near the back steps, and each morning the items would be gone, showing the girl had accepted them, but she never came inside. Still, she allowed Sophia to brush her hair and clean her hands. Sophia felt honored by that trust. It wasn't much, but it meant the girl was slowly opening up. Sophia stayed patient, never pushing, only offering kindness. One day Sophia had an idea. She didn't want to scare the girl, but she needed to show someone what she was seeing every day. So she waited until the girl and Ethan were playing and quietly took a few pictures with her phone. The images were clear. 2 children laughing, running, and sitting on the swing together. When she looked at the photos, she was shocked again. The similarity between them was undeniable. Side by side, it was like looking at a boy and girl version of the same child. Their eyes, their faces, even their smiles. It was too much to ignore. That night, when Alexander came home, Sophia waited until Ethan was asleep. Then she showed him the photos. He stared at them for a long time. At first he said nothing. Then he slowly sat down, took a deep breath and whispered, "It's like looking at Ethan as a girl." It was the final push he needed. He had doubts before, but now he couldn't deny that something strange and possibly very wrong had happened in the past. He took action. The next morning he made several phone calls. He hired a private investigator, someone with experience in hospital records and family cases. Alexander asked for everything. Records from the medical center where Ethan was born, staff lists, birth certificates, and any reports of missing or unidentified children from the same time. He wanted real answers, not just guesses. Sophia helped by writing down everything she had noticed about the girl, her habits, behavior, appearance, and how she interacted with Ethan. While the investigator began searching for the truth, Sophia continued caring for the children. Every afternoon she brought food, water, and extra clothes. The courtyard became a place not only for play, but for waiting, for something bigger to be revealed. As the days passed, something beautiful happened. Despite all the mystery, Sophia, Ethan, and the girl created a small, peaceful routine. Every day felt like a gift. Ethan and the girl played with rocks, flowers, and sticks, inventing games that made them laugh. Sophia sometimes joined in, drawing in the dirt, or helping build little piles of leaves. She watched their connection grow stronger and deeper. Sometimes Ethan would rest his head on the girl's shoulder, and she would quietly place her hand over his. Other times they would run in circles, laughing until they fell to the ground. It was like they were healing each other through simple joy. Sophia took more photos, not to investigate but to remember. Even though no one had answers yet, something important was happening, something pure. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about now, a moment of innocence, trust, and silent love between 2 children. The private investigation moved quickly. Alexander had asked the detective to look into every detail of Ethan's birth. Within a few days, troubling information started to come back. The medical center where Ethan was born had poorly organized records from the day of the delivery. Names of staff members were missing, and signatures were mismatched. But one thing stood out the most. A nurse who had been on shift that night had left his job suddenly just 2 days after the birth. There was no forwarding address, no resignation letter. He had simply vanished. The detective couldn't trace him. This detail hit Alexander hard. He sat alone in his office, staring at the paper in front of him. His hands were shaking. The more he looked at the missing pieces, the more he realized something very wrong had happened that night. Alexander didn't want to guess anymore. He needed proof. He needed a real answer. That same night, Alexander called Sophia into the study. He was tired, but his voice was firm. "I want to do a DNA test," he said. "We need to know for sure." Sophia nodded. She agreed it was time, but she also knew it wouldn't be easy. The little girl still didn't trust anyone fully except Ethan and Sophia a little. Getting her to go into the city would be difficult. The next day, Sophia spent time sitting with the girl, talking softly. She explained everything in simple words, that they just wanted to check something, that there would be no needles, no pain, and they would all go together. At first the girl didn't react, but when Ethan took her hand and said, "Come, sister," she finally nodded. Sophia gave her a clean dress and brushed her hair. Then they got into the car. Alexander drove silent the whole way. No one said much. The clinic was small and quiet. Alexander had arranged everything in secret, asking the doctor to handle the DNA test privately. They entered through a back door, avoiding attention. The girl looked around nervously, but Sophia stayed by her side, holding her hand. Ethan sat next to them, calm as always. The test itself was quick. A nurse gently rubbed the inside of the girl's cheek with a cotton swab, then did the same with Alexander and Ethan. It was over in minutes. Sophia thanked the staff and helped the girl back into the car. Alexander arranged for the samples to be sent to a trusted lab. He made it clear he wanted fast and accurate results. Back at the estate, everyone was quiet. No one knew what to say. The wait began. It would take days to get the answer. Each person carried their own thoughts, but no one said them out loud. During those days of waiting, something unexpected started to happen in the estate. Alexander began to change. For the first time in years, he wasn't spending every hour locked in his office or staring at business reports. Instead, he spent more time watching the children. One afternoon, he stood at the window and saw Ethan and the girl running barefoot across the grass. They laughed, fell, and got back up again. Alexander smiled, a real smile. Sophia saw it from the kitchen and felt a deep warmth in her chest. Little by little, Alexander started talking to Ethan more. He asked questions, tried to play simple games. Even if awkwardly, he was clearly trying. Ethan responded in small ways. A look, a nod, a soft word. Sophia stayed close through it all. She didn't take control. She simply stayed present, guiding, gently, helping things move forward without forcing anything. She had become their connection. Sophia continued to care for the girl each day. She made sure she ate, stayed clean, and felt safe. Though the girl still wouldn't sleep inside the estate, she started staying longer in the evenings. She would sit on the porch steps or lie down on a blanket under the stars, while Ethan held her hand. Sophia never pushed her. She simply made sure the girl felt welcome. Alexander had started calling her Little One, and once even asked if she wanted juice. The girl didn't answer, but she didn't run away either. The atmosphere in the estate was different now, lighter, less cold. It was no longer a place of silence and schedules. It was starting to feel like a real home, even if only slowly. Everyone was still waiting for the test results. But something inside each of them was already shifting. The possibility of truth was already bringing them closer together. Finally, after 6 long days, the results arrived. The envelope came in the morning. Alexander took it from the delivery driver himself, closed the front door, and walked to the living room. Sophia was already there with the children, helping them color on the floor. Alexander stood still, holding the envelope tightly. He opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the paper. He didn't speak. Sophia stood and walked closer. "Alexander." He turned to her, his face pale. "She's mine," he said. "She's Ethan's twin." The room fell silent. Alexander dropped to the couch, still staring at the page. The little girl looked up from the floor, not fully understanding. Ethan crawled toward her and hugged her tightly. "Sister," he said again. Sophia sat beside them, her eyes full. The truth had finally come. The girl who had appeared out of nowhere was not a stranger. She was a missing part of their family. A piece of their story finally returned. Alexander sat in his office holding the DNA results in his hands for the 10th time that morning. The truth was clear now. The girl was his daughter. There was no more doubt. But instead of bringing him peace, it opened a storm inside him. He felt guilt for not questioning things sooner. He felt anger at the people who had lied to him. And above all, he felt a heavy sadness for all the years he had missed with her, for all the nights she had likely slept alone, cold, hungry, or scared. His chest hurt as he imagined her as a baby taken away without a name or voice. He stared at the old photos of his wife, remembering her smile, and the name she had picked years ago if their baby had been a girl, Isabella. That name stayed in his head now. He wasn't just hurt. He was ready to act. Alexander picked up the phone and called the medical center directly. He didn't ask politely. He demanded to speak with the director. His voice was firm and his words cut through every excuse. "I have proof," he said, "and I want answers." Soon the case reached higher levels. News of missing hospital records and a vanishing nurse caused tension among the staff. But then something unexpected happened. An older nurse, no longer working at the medical center but still in contact with some people there, came forward. She confessed. Years ago she had given a newborn baby to a woman she knew, claiming the child had died. She was part of a hidden network involved in baby trafficking. She said she regretted it and had kept silent out of fear. According to her, the woman who took Isabella never returned to the hospital. Somehow the girl ended up lost or escaped. Alexander couldn't believe what he was hearing. The story spread fast and the medical center faced a scandal. Investigations began. Reporters camped outside the building. Alexander stayed away from the media. He wasn't interested in headlines. He wanted justice. More than that, he wanted his daughter to be safe and to never feel abandoned again. With his lawyer's help, he started the legal process to adopt her back. Though she was already his biological daughter, her papers didn't exist. She was, in the eyes of the government, a child without identity. Alexander refused to wait. He moved quickly, signing every document and attending every appointment. When it came time to choose a name, he didn't hesitate. He called her Isabella, just as his wife had wished. When he told Sophia and the children, Sophia nodded with tears in her eyes. Ethan clapped his hands and hugged Isabella. Isabella didn't speak, but she smiled. A full, trusting smile. That name became hers completely. Once Isabella was officially registered, something changed in the estate. It wasn't just about papers. It was about connection. Isabella and Ethan, now known as twins, began to act even more united. They ate together, played together, and even fell asleep holding hands on the couch. Ethan, who used to stay silent most of the day, began to speak more words. He wasn't afraid anymore. Isabella, who had lived most of her short life hiding and surviving, now had her own room, clean clothes, and a safe place to sleep every night. Alexander watched them closely. He began to enjoy small things like preparing snacks, telling bedtime stories, or helping Ethan draw. He even started laughing, really laughing. The estate used to feel like a museum, cold, clean, and quiet. But now it had become alive again. Toys were everywhere. Laughter echoed in the halls, and the silence was no longer heavy. It was filled with joy. Sophia remained in the center of it all, but never in the spotlight. She didn't ask for credit or praise. She still cooked, cleaned, and helped with the children as before, but everyone saw her differently now. Isabella would sit next to her whenever she could. Ethan always reached for her hand first when something upset him. Alexander, once cold and distant, now looked at her with something more than appreciation. He admired her. She had brought change into the estate without forcing anything. She had paid attention when no one else did. She had listened, cared, and acted. Alexander found himself looking at her during dinner, wondering what her life had been like before all of this. He started to ask questions, not about chores, but about her thoughts and dreams. Sophia answered simply, never expecting more. But it was clear to both of them that something was growing between them, something honest and new. Alexander stood in the courtyard one evening, watching the twins play near the swing. Isabella was pushing Ethan gently while he laughed. Sophia stood nearby folding some clothes. The sun was setting behind the trees, and for the first time in a very long time, Alexander felt at peace. He took a deep breath and looked at Sophia. "Thank you," he said quietly. Sophia smiled, unsure of what to say. Everything had changed. The truth had been painful, but it had opened a path to healing. Alexander had regained a daughter he never knew he lost. Ethan had found his sister. Isabella had found safety. And all of it had started because one woman paid attention to a silent boy at a window. Alexander didn't know what the future would bring, but now he was no longer afraid to hope. He was no longer numb. For the first time in years, he was living again. The family was slowly putting the pieces back together. Life inside the estate had changed completely. Ethan, once quiet and hidden in his own world, now spoke in short sentences. He smiled more often. He even laughed out loud while playing with Isabella, something that had never happened before. He still had his quiet moments. But there was light in his eyes now. Isabella was no longer the frightened girl who hid behind trees and refused to come inside. She had her own room, toys, and a safe bed. She followed Ethan everywhere and hugged him often. The two were inseparable. They played, drew on the walls with crayons, and sometimes just sat next to each other without saying a word. But even in silence, they were connected. They didn't need to explain anything. It was clear to everyone that they were more than siblings. They were two halves of the same story. Alexander had changed as well. The man who once lived in his office, focused only on work and closed off from emotions, was no longer the same. He still had days when grief came back, but now he faced them with open eyes. He spent more time with the twins, reading to them or sitting on the floor while they played. He learned how to help Ethan stay calm during stressful moments and how to make Isabella feel safe without pressuring her. His love was real now, not just responsibility, but presence. Inspired by everything that happened, Alexander decided to create something meaningful. He started a foundation in memory of his late wife. The goal was to support children with autism and also children without homes like Isabella once was. He wanted to make sure other kids like his wouldn't be forgotten or left behind. It became his way of turning pain into something useful. When the foundation opened, Alexander asked Sophia to take part. He offered her a formal job with a title and office, but Sophia refused kindly. She didn't want a title. She wasn't interested in paperwork or meetings. Her place, she said, was with the children. Not only Ethan and Isabella, but others too. Alexander understood. Sophia had never done any of this for money or position. She had done it because she cared. So instead of forcing her into a role, he simply asked her to stay as she was part of the family. Sophia accepted. She continued to help with daily routines, playing with the children and organizing the home. But everyone knew she was more than just a helper. She was the one who saw what no one else did. She had changed their lives. Ethan called her Sophia, but the way he said it meant much more than just a name. Alexander and Sophia grew closer, but nothing was rushed. They talked more often, sometimes late into the night. Alexander listened to her stories about her past, and Sophia listened when he needed to speak about his wife. There was no pressure, no awkwardness. It was natural. He started noticing small things. How she smiled when Isabella danced. How she reacted quickly when Ethan needed comfort. How she remembered every little detail that mattered. Sophia saw his efforts too. How he tried to be better every day. How he didn't hide his feelings anymore. And how he was learning to be present. Their relationship was built on respect, not plans. People outside the estate often asked who Sophia was. Alexander would simply answer, "She's with us." That was enough. The children trusted her. He did too. And even though neither of them spoke of love openly, it was clear that something strong and steady had grown between them. One of the biggest changes happened in the courtyard. The old swing, once rusty and forgotten, was now fixed and clean. Alexander had it repaired after the DNA results came in as a way to mark the beginning of their new life. He painted the frame himself and added 2 ropes strong enough for both children to swing together. Every afternoon, Ethan and Isabella ran out to the swing as soon as they finished lunch. It became their favorite place. Sometimes they laughed and played loudly. Other times they sat quietly, just swinging side by side. The swing had been where Sophia first saw Ethan trying to tell the world something important. Now it had become a place of joy, memory, and healing. Whenever Sophia looked at it, she felt grateful. That swing had started everything. It had brought the past into the present. It had shown them the path to truth and love. The courtyard became the heart of the home. It was no longer just grass and trees. It was a place full of meaning. The swing stood as a symbol not just of the twins' bond, but of everything the family had been through. The pain, the mystery, the discovery, and the healing. Ethan and Isabella played there every day, and Sophia often watched them from the kitchen window. Alexander sometimes joined them, sitting on the steps with a cup of coffee, smiling as he watched his children laugh. Life wasn't perfect, and there were still hard days. But the difference now was that they faced those days together. What had once been an estate full of silence had become a home full of love and new memories. They were not the same people they had been before, and that was okay. Two hearts, Ethan's and Isabella's, had rewritten their story with Sophia and Alexander walking beside them. Years passed. The courtyard was no longer wild and overgrown like it had once been. The grass was trimmed, the flowers were bright, and the trees were taller now, offering more shade. But one thing hadn't changed: the swing. It was still in the same place where everything had started. Now it was painted white and flowers grew around its base. Ethan and Isabella, no longer children, were now teenagers. They were taller, stronger, and more confident. But every now and then they would come back to the swing just like before. On that particular day, they were laughing and pushing each other on it, taking turns. They talked about school, about life, and even joked about who could still swing higher. From a distance, it looked like any normal day. But for their family, this place was never just a courtyard. It was the beginning of everything. It held the first signs of change. The family had become something special. What started with pain and confusion had slowly turned into something full of love and purpose. Alexander had written a book about their story. It told the truth, not just about the hospital scandal, but also about grief, healing, and rediscovery. The book became well known, and soon Alexander was invited to speak at schools and conferences. Sophia sometimes went with him, always quiet but strong. She would sit beside him and listen as he spoke about how listening, just listening, had changed everything. Ethan and Isabella also joined sometimes. They were not just symbols of the story. They were living proof that love and attention could rebuild what was once broken. People in the audience often cried. Many stayed after the events to thank them, to share their own stories, or to say they felt inspired. The story that once belonged to only them now belonged to many others too. Ethan, now a teenager, had become someone no one expected. He wasn't just more talkative. He was confident. He spoke clearly in public, especially when it came to telling his own story. He stood in front of classrooms and told other children about the days when he couldn't speak much, about how he used to sit by the window and point. He explained how it felt to be invisible, how it hurt when people ignored him. But then he smiled and told them what changed. Someone had listened. It was Sophia, he said once in a school auditorium. She didn't walk past me like everyone else. She stopped. She looked. She asked me why I pointed. And that changed everything. Children listened closely and teachers wiped their eyes. Ethan's voice was calm, not dramatic. He didn't try to make people cry. He just told the truth, and somehow that was more powerful than anything else. Isabella also found her voice. She didn't enjoy speaking on stage like Ethan, but she became active in helping other kids, especially those who had lived on the streets like she once did. She worked with the foundation Alexander had created and spent time with children who were scared, quiet, or confused. She knew how it felt. She didn't forget. Sophia taught her how to care gently, how to be patient, and how to protect someone without smothering them. Isabella used those lessons every day. She often returned to the swing in the courtyard alone or with a child in her care, sitting quietly just like she once had. It was her way of remembering where she came from. Isabella didn't need fame or attention. She just needed people to be safe like she finally was. Her calm nature balanced Ethan's energy. Together they were strong. Together they represented not a perfect story, but a real one. Alexander had changed the most. He was no longer the man frozen in grief. He still missed his wife, but the pain had softened. In its place there was something new: gratitude. He had learned how to be a father again, and how to be part of something bigger than himself. He no longer worked only for business deals and numbers. His foundation had grown and helped hundreds of children. But more than that, he had become someone others could rely on. His relationship with Sophia had also deepened. They were partners in every way, at home, at work, and in life. Sophia never wanted a title, but to Alexander she was the core of everything. He often said that she was the person who saw what no one else had. When people asked how the family survived so much, Alexander answered simply, "Because one woman cared enough to ask a question no one else did." The foundation they had built together became more than just a charity. It became a movement. Schools across the country started implementing programs based on their story, teaching children and teachers alike about the importance of truly seeing and listening to every child. Alexander and Sophia traveled together, sharing their experiences and helping train educators to recognize the signs when a child was trying to communicate something important. They established listening centers in hospitals and schools, places where children could feel safe expressing themselves without judgment. Sophia, despite her initial reluctance to take on official roles, eventually accepted the position of Director of Child Advocacy. She created training programs for caregivers, teaching them to look beyond the surface and understand that every behavior, especially in children with special needs, had meaning. Her gentle approach and natural empathy made her a sought-after speaker at conferences worldwide. She never forgot her humble beginnings, and every speech she gave included the reminder that sometimes the smallest act of attention could change a life forever. The estate itself had been transformed too. What was once a cold, quiet mansion had become a warm sanctuary. Alexander had converted part of it into a residential facility for children awaiting placement in loving homes. The courtyard, with its famous swing, became a therapeutic space where children could play, heal, and learn to trust again. Professional therapists worked alongside Sophia and the twins to create an environment where every child felt valued and heard. Ethan's development continued to amaze everyone. By his late teens, he had not only overcome many of his communication challenges, but had become an advocate for autism awareness. He started a blog called Pointing at Windows, where he shared his experiences and helped other families understand autism from the inside out. His writing was simple but profound, touching thousands of readers who saw their own struggles reflected in his words. He often wrote about that swing, about the importance of having someone who doesn't just hear your words, but understands your heart. Isabella, meanwhile, had become a certified child counselor, specializing in trauma recovery. She had a unique ability to connect with children who had experienced abandonment or abuse. Her own story gave her credibility that no textbook could provide. She would often take the children she worked with to the old swing, showing them that places of pain could become places of healing. Under her care, many children learned to trust again, to believe that they too could find their forever family. The medical center scandal that had separated the twins had far-reaching consequences. The investigation uncovered an entire network of illegal adoptions and child trafficking. Dozens of families were reunited with children they had thought were lost forever. Alexander used his resources and connections to support these reunions, providing legal aid and counseling services. The case led to major reforms in hospital protocols and record-keeping, ensuring that what happened to his family could never happen again. As the years passed, Alexander and Sophia's relationship naturally evolved from partnership to love. Their wedding was a simple ceremony held in the courtyard, with Ethan and Isabella as their witnesses. The swing was decorated with white ribbons and flowers from Victoria's favorite garden, which they had restored in her memory. It wasn't about replacing Victoria, but about honoring her memory while embracing a new chapter. Sophia had helped Alexander learn that love wasn't finite. Loving again didn't diminish what he had shared with his first wife. The foundation continued to grow, eventually becoming an international organization. They opened centers in multiple countries, each one built around the core principle that every child deserves to be seen, heard, and understood. The Victoria Memorial Foundation became synonymous with hope for families dealing with autism, child trafficking, and family separation. Alexander stepped back from his business empire to focus entirely on this work, finding more fulfillment in changing lives than he had ever found in making money. On quiet evenings, the family would still gather in the courtyard. Ethan and Isabella, now young adults, would sometimes sit on the swing together, talking about their days, their dreams, their challenges. Alexander and Sophia would watch from the porch, marveling at how far they had all come. The swing that had once been a desperate attempt at communication had become a symbol of healing, connection, and the power of never giving up on someone you love. The story of the boy who pointed at the window became legendary, told and retold in classrooms, conference rooms, and living rooms around the world. But for the family who lived it, it was simply their life. Imperfect, challenging at times, but filled with the kind of love that transforms not just individuals, but entire communities. They had learned that sometimes the most broken families can become the strongest, and that healing isn't about forgetting the past, but about learning to write a better future. Isabella sat nearby, leaning against the tree. Sophia and Alexander were in the background, watching quietly. Ethan pointed to the swing behind him. "This was where everything started," he said. "I used to sit here when I didn't know how to ask for help. I would point hoping someone would notice. One day someone did, and that's how my life changed." The kids listened in silence. Sometimes, Ethan added, "Love doesn't need big words. Sometimes it's just someone seeing you when no one else does." He looked over at Sophia and smiled. Then he turned to the children again. "So if you see someone sitting alone, don't walk past, just ask why." The swing moved gently behind him. It wasn't just a seat anymore. It was a reminder, a symbol of how love had quietly saved them all. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.